My name is Michael Torres, and I am 45 years old. For the past 10 years, I've tried to convince myself that the sound of wind through Carolina pines could replace the whistle of incoming rounds, that the rhythm of my son Daniel's laughter could drown out the echoes of distant gunfire that still wake me some nights. I run a small outdoor survival training business from our modest property outside Asheville, teaching weekend warriors and corporate team building groups how to read tracks, start fires, and find true north when everything familiar disappears. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This morning, Daniel and I walked the familiar trail down to Miller's Creek, our fishing gear slung over shoulders that have carried much heavier loads. At 16, he's got his mother's quick wit and something I hope came from me. A quiet way of moving through the world that doesn't disturb what doesn't need disturbing. The creek ran clear and cold, reflecting the October sky like polished steel. Dead. You think we'll catch anything today? Daniel asked, baiting his hook with the practiced ease I'd taught him years ago. Remember what I taught you about observation? Watch the water, read the signs, wait for the right moment. He grinned, and for a heartbeat, everything felt exactly as it should. Above us, a red-tailed hawk circled lazily, riding thermals with the kind of effortless precision I once knew. Watching it, I felt that familiar itch between my shoulder blades, the one that used to keep me alive in places where survival came down to seeing what others missed. Even here, in the peaceful heart of North Carolina, that old radar never quite shut off. When we returned home that evening, Elena was in the kitchen, moving through the motions of dinner preparation with a distraction that made me pause in the doorway. 20 years of marriage teaches you to read the subtle shifts in your partner's orbit. She used to hum while cooking, used to ask about our day with genuine curiosity. Now she offered smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes and conversations that felt choreographed. "How was the fishing?" she asked, without looking up from the cutting board. "Good. Daniel's getting better at reading the water." I studied her profile, searching for whatever had been pulling her away from us these past months. "Everything okay?" "Of course, just tired." She brushed a strand of dark hair from her face, and I noticed her wedding ring catching the kitchen light. "There's leftover roast in the fridge if you're hungry." That night, as Elena slept beside me, I lay awake listening to the familiar sounds of our house settling into darkness. But underneath the creaking beams and distant traffic, I heard something else. The same silence that used to precede incoming trouble in places where silence could get you killed. My instincts, honed by years of surviving in hostile territory, whispered that something was moving in the shadows of our carefully constructed peace. I told myself I was being paranoid, that 10 years of civilian life should have trained the soldier out of me. But as I watched moonlight paint geometric patterns across our bedroom ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that our quiet life was about to become much more complicated. The first time I saw Victor Delgado's silver BMW parked outside Henderson's diner, I almost dismissed it as just another tourist passing through our small town. Almost. But 25 years of military service taught me that details matter. And expensive cars in working-class neighborhoods usually meant someone was either lost or hunting. I was picking up lunch for Elena when I noticed him through the diner window. Mid-40s, well-dressed, with the kind of smooth confidence that comes from never having to worry about where your next meal is coming from. He was watching the street with the focused attention of someone conducting surveillance, his eyes scanning pedestrians and storefronts with systematic precision. When our eyes met through the glass, he smiled. It was the practiced smile of a man who sold things: cars, insurance, promises. But there was something underneath it that made my neck prickle with recognition. I'd seen that look before, in places where smiling men often carried concealed weapons.
The second time I saw the BMW was 3 days later, parked across from Daniel's school as students filed out for the day. This time, Victor wasn't inside. I circled the block twice before spotting him leaning against a brick wall near the main entrance, apparently absorbed in his phone but positioned to observe every teenager who passed. I pulled over and called Elena. "Do you know anyone who drives a silver BMW? Someone named Victor, maybe?" The pause lasted just a heartbeat too long. "Victor? Why would you ask that?" "Saw someone fitting that description around town. Seemed interested in the school." "Oh." Her voice carried a note I couldn't quite identify. "He's just a businessman I know. Nothing to worry about." That evening, I waited until Elena was in the shower before walking our property perimeter. Old habits die hard, and something about Victor's presence had awakened instincts I thought I'd successfully buried. The tree line looked clear, but as I rounded the house toward our driveway, I caught a glimpse of silver chrome glinting between the pines across the road. The BMW was parked just far enough back to avoid casual detection, positioned with a clear sightline to our front door. I couldn't see the driver, but I didn't need to. Someone was watching our home, learning our routines, mapping the patterns of our daily lives. I pulled over and called Elena. "Do you know anyone who drives a silver BMW? Someone named Victor, maybe?" The pause lasted just a heartbeat too long. "Victor? Why would you ask that?" "Saw someone fitting that description around town. Seemed interested in the school." "Oh." Her voice carried a note I couldn't quite identify. "He's just a businessman I know. Nothing to worry about." That night, after Elena had fallen asleep, I retrieved my old field notebook from the lockbox in my closet. I hadn't touched it in over a decade, but the muscle memory of tactical planning came back as naturally as breathing. I began documenting everything I knew about Victor Delgado, his vehicle, his appearance, his patterns of movement. Whatever game he was playing, he'd made one critical mistake. He'd chosen to threaten a man who'd spent years perfecting the art of patient observation and deadly response. Victor cornered me outside Brennan's Hardware on a Tuesday morning when the autumn air still carried the bite of overnight frost. I was loading fence posts into my truck when he materialized beside me with the silent approach of someone accustomed to moving unnoticed. "Michael Torres, I think it's time we had a conversation." I straightened slowly, keeping my hands visible and my posture relaxed. 25 years of military training had taught me to assess threats quickly and completely. Victor stood about 6 feet tall, athletic build beneath an expensive jacket, hands manicured but with calluses that suggested he wasn't afraid of physical work. His smile was warm, but his eyes remained flat and calculating.
Do I know you? Not yet. But you know Elena very well. He stepped closer, invading my personal space with the confidence of a man who'd never encountered serious resistance. Beautiful woman, passionate, deserves better than being married to a ghost. The words hit like a physical blow, confirming what I'd already suspected but hadn't allowed myself to fully acknowledge. Elena's late nights, her distraction, her carefully constructed explanations, it all suddenly made perfect sense. "What do you want?" I kept my voice level, professional. Emotion was a luxury I couldn't afford until I understood the full scope of the threat. "Elena's happiness, and your cooperation." Victor leaned against my truck with casual familiarity, as if we were old friends discussing the weather. "See, she wants to start fresh, new life, new possibilities. But she's got these pesky commitments holding her back." "Her family, you mean?" "Her obligations," he corrected me with the tone of a man splitting semantic hairs. "But I'm a reasonable person, Michael. I understand the transitions can be complicated, especially when children are involved." The mention of Daniel sent ice through my veins, but I forced my expression to remain neutral. "Leave my son out of this." Victor's smile widened. "That depends entirely on you. Daniel's a good kid, smart, athletic, reminds me of myself at that age.
It would be a shame if something happened to interrupt his bright future. For a moment, the civilian mask I had worn for 10 years slipped completely. Victor must have seen something in my eyes before he caught himself. "Careful, Michael. I know all about your military background. Very impressive record, by the way. But this isn't Afghanistan, and I'm not some cave-dwelling insurgent you can eliminate from 1,000 meters away. This is the real world, with real consequences. What exactly are you threatening?" "I'm not threatening anything. I'm explaining reality." Victor pushed off from my truck and straightened his jacket. "Think about it, Michael. You've got 48 hours to decide whether you want to do this the easy way or the hard way. For Daniel's sake, I hope you choose wisely." As he walked toward his BMW, Victor called back over his shoulder, "Oh, and Michael? That old friend of yours, the sheriff's deputy, Cole Matthews? Might want to keep him out of this. Small towns have a way of making law enforcement officers disappear when they stick their noses where they don't belong." I stood in the hardware store parking lot for several minutes after Victor drove away, feeling the familiar weight of combat decisions settling across my shoulders. The careful peace I'd built over the past decade was crumbling, and underneath its ruins, something darker and more dangerous was beginning to stir. That evening, I sat Daniel down for a conversation that would change everything between us. "Son, there's something I need you to understand about the world. Sometimes good people have to make hard choices to protect the people they love." Daniel looked up from his homework with Elena's dark eyes and my own stubborn chin. "Is everything okay, Dad?" "It will be," I promised him. "But for the next few days, I need you to be extra careful. Stay close to school, don't go anywhere alone, and if anyone you don't recognize tries to talk to you, you call me immediately." What I didn't tell him was that I'd already begun planning Victor Delgado's destruction with the same methodical precision I'd once used to eliminate targets half a world away.
Cole Matthews still moved like a Marine, even 15 years after leaving the Corps. When he walked into Murphy's Tavern that evening, his eyes swept the room with automatic precision, cataloging exits and potential threats before settling on my corner booth. The years had added some gray to his temples and carved deeper lines around his eyes, but the essential Cole remained unchanged, loyal, direct, and dangerous when cornered. "Torres, you son of a bitch!" He slid into the seat across from me with a grin that faded as he studied my expression. "You look like hell. What's wrong?" I'd called Cole that afternoon using language we'd developed during our deployment in Fallujah. Phrases that sounded like casual conversation, but carried deeper meaning. "Need some advice about a neighborhood watch situation," translated to potential threat requiring tactical consultation. "I need your help, brother, and I need it off the books." Cole's expression shifted to full attention. During our 2 tours together, he'd learned to read the subtle changes in my demeanor that preceded violent action. "Talk to me." I explained everything: Elena's affair, Victor's threats, the surveillance of our home and Daniel's school. As I spoke, Cole's face hardened into the expression I remembered from firefights in urban Iraqi neighborhoods. "Victor Delgado," he repeated when I finished. "I'll run him through the system tonight, but that name sounds familiar, not in a good way." "What do you mean?" "There was an incident about 2 years ago, domestic violence call, involving a woman named Patricia Hernandez and her boyfriend. Boyfriend was described as well-dressed, expensive car, spoke with an accent. Charges were dropped when Patricia suddenly decided not to cooperate." Cole pulled out his phone and scrolled through what looked like official notes. 3 months later, Patricia was found beaten so badly she spent 2 weeks in intensive care. Never identified her attacker, but her medical bills were mysteriously paid in full by an anonymous benefactor. The implications settled between us like poison gas. Victor wasn't just manipulative, he was capable of extreme violence when crossed. "There's more," Cole continued. "We've had reports of a well-dressed Hispanic male conducting surveillance around various upscale neighborhoods. Always gone before we can respond, but the pattern suggests professional reconnaissance." "You think he's working for someone else? Or building a client list?" Cole leaned forward, lowering his voice. Michael, this guy isn't just some jealous boyfriend. If he's threatening Daniel, he's got the experience and resources to follow through. The weight of that knowledge hit me like a physical blow. I'd survived multiple combat deployments by never underestimating the enemy, but some part of me had hoped Victor was just a civilian predator who'd back down when confronted by superior force. What are my options legally? Cole's laughter carried no humor. You can file a report, maybe get a restraining order if you can prove specific threats, but paper doesn't stop bullets, and it doesn't protect teenage boys walking home from school. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us remembering other conversations in other places where legal solutions weren't available or sufficient. I'm not asking you to do anything that could cost you your badge. Bullshit, Cole's response was immediate and fierce. You saved my life in Fallujah, twice. If this Victor bastard wants to threaten your family, he's gonna have to go through both of us. Cole, no arguments, brother. You taught me that Marines never leave their own behind. That doesn't change just because we're stateside now. Cole stood and dropped a 20 on the table. I'll have everything on Victor Delgado by tomorrow morning. Financial records, criminal history, known associates, current address, and Michael.
I looked up to meet his steady gaze. If it comes down to it, you know I've got your back, whatever it takes. After Cole left, I remained in the booth for another hour, nursing a beer I didn't taste, and planning contingencies for scenarios I prayed wouldn't develop. But deep in my chest, something that had been dormant for 10 years was awakening. The cold, patient fury of a professional killer who'd been pushed too far. Victor Delgado had made a critical error in judgment. He'd threatened a United States Marines family and assumed civilian life had made him soft. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. The text message arrived on Daniel's phone during his third period English class. Your dad can't protect you forever, but I can teach you things he never could. Daniel showed me the message that afternoon, his hands trembling slightly as he held the phone between us. 16 years old, honor roll student, starting quarterback on the JV football team, and now the target of a predator who understood exactly how to apply psychological pressure. Dad, who would send something like this? I studied the message, noting the number was blocked and the phrasing suggested someone with intimate knowledge of our family dynamics. Victor was escalating, moving from subtle threats to direct intimidation. It was the behavior of a predator testing boundaries before committing to an attack. Someone who's made a very serious mistake, I told Daniel. From now on, you don't go anywhere alone. School to home, home to school. If you need to go somewhere else, you call me first. Is this about Mom? The question hit harder than I'd expected. At 16, Daniel was old enough to recognize the tension that had been building in our house, smart enough to connect patterns that adults thought they were hiding. It's complicated, son, but I need you to trust me when I say I'm going to handle this. That evening, after Elena had gone to bed claiming exhaustion, I sat in my truck across from Daniel's school, watching the empty parking lot and surrounding streets. Military surveillance training dies hard, and something about Victor's escalation pattern suggested he would want to establish physical proximity to his target. At 11:47 p.m., the silver BMW materialized from the darkness like a shark surfacing in still water. Victor parked near the faculty entrance, positioning himself with a clear view of the main student pickup area. Through my binoculars, I could see him making notes in what appeared to be the same notebook I had observed before. He was mapping Daniel's routine, learning the rhythms of teenage life that would allow him to approach my son when I wasn't there to interfere. I reached for my phone to call Cole, then stopped. This was surveillance, not action. If I moved too early, Victor would simply adapt his tactics and become harder to track. Better to gather intelligence and wait for him to reveal his full intentions. For 3 hours, I maintained my position while Victor conducted his reconnaissance. He photographed the school entrances, noted the timing of security patrols, and compiled what looked like a comprehensive tactical assessment. When he finally left at 2:30 a.m., he drove past our house twice before disappearing into the night. The next morning, Daniel found a folded piece of paper tucked under his bicycle tire in our driveway. The message was brief and chilling. "Daniel, your dad was a killer overseas. Ask him how many children he's seen die. Ask him if he cares more about them or you." I found Daniel sitting on our front porch, staring at the note with the expression of someone's world view was crumbling in real time. "Dad, is this true? About what you did in the war?" I sat beside him on the wooden steps we'd built together 3 summers ago, searching for words that could bridge the gap between the man he'd always known and the soldier I'd been before he was born.
War is complicated, Daniel. Sometimes good people have to do terrible things to protect innocent people. I've never lied to you about my service, but I've never shared the details because I didn't want those memories to become yours. Did you kill people? The question hung between us like smoke from a distant fire. Yes, when I had to protect my fellow Marines and to complete missions that saved other lives. Daniel absorbed this with the serious expression he'd inherited from his mother. And now someone's threatening us because of it? No, son. Someone's threatening us because they think I've forgotten how to protect what matters most to me. I put my hand on his shoulder, feeling the solid reality of his presence. They're wrong. That afternoon, while Daniel was at football practice under the watchful eye of Coach Morrison, a former Army Ranger I'd briefed on the situation, I drove to the sporting goods store in Asheville and purchased items I hadn't touched in over a decade. That evening, I began preparing for war. By midnight, I had my old ghillie suit laid out on the basement floor beside cleaning supplies from my .308 Winchester, the rifle that had once made me one of the most effective long-range eliminators in the Marine Corps. My hands moved through the familiar routines of weapon maintenance with muscle memory that transcended conscious thought. Victor Delgado wanted to play psychological warfare with a United States Marine sniper who'd spent years perfecting the art of patient lethality. He was about to discover that some skills never fade. They just wait in the darkness until the right moment to resurface. The hunt was about to begin. Rosa Delgado met me at Mercy General Hospital during her midnight shift, her brother's dark eyes carrying none of his predatory charm. She led me to an empty break room, checking the hallway twice before closing the door. "You're Michael Torres. Victor's been talking about you. He thinks you're weak because you've gone soft in civilian life. He's wrong, isn't he?" I studied her face, noting the faint scar along her left temple and the way she unconsciously favored her right side when she moved. "Tell me about your brother." Victor destroyed my marriage by seducing my husband's business partner, then blackmailed them both into bankruptcy. When I tried to intervene, he put me in the hospital twice, once with a fall down the stairs, once with food poisoning that nearly killed me. Rosa's hands trembled as she poured coffee from a pot that had seen better days. "You can't reason with him or buy him off. Victor sees everything as a conquest, and he's never met resistance he couldn't eventually break." How do I stop him? Rosa met my eyes with the direct gaze of someone who'd stared into darkness and emerged changed. "The only way he stops is if he can't continue. But you need to understand what you're dealing with. Victor isn't just some manipulative lover. He's connected to people who make problems disappear permanently." That night, I returned to skills that had kept me alive through 2 combat deployments in some of the most hostile territory on Earth.
I mapped Victor's patterns with the methodical precision that had once made me one of the most effective long-range eliminators in the Marine Corps. His apartment complex on the wealthy side of Asheville, his nightclub downtown, the gym where he apparently recruited vulnerable women. Every location became a point on a tactical map. Through my scope, positioned in the tree line overlooking his nightclub's parking lot, I watched Victor conduct business with men who moved like professional killers. They carried themselves with the loose-limbed confidence of people accustomed to violence, and their conversations involved hand gestures that suggested financial transactions of significant value.
Victor wasn't just manipulative. He was a node in a network that trafficked in violence, fear, and human misery. Elena had stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple affair, and Daniel had become collateral damage in a game where the stakes included life and death. The red-tailed hawk I'd noticed weeks ago circled overhead as I conducted surveillance, and I understood its meaning now. We were both hunters, patient and precise, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But unlike the hawk, I carried the weight of 25 years of training in the art of eliminating human threats with surgical precision. As I packed my reconnaissance gear and prepared to return home, I felt the familiar coldness settling over my thoughts, the mental state that had once made me capable of taking a human life from over 1,000 meters away. Victor Delgado had awakened something in me that I'd hoped would never be necessary again. Thursday evening, I returned from a client consultation to find our front door standing open like a mouth screaming into the gathering darkness. Elena's car was gone from the driveway, and the silence that greeted me carried the weight of violation and threat. Daniel's backpack lay scattered across the living room floor, homework papers floating like battlefield debris in the breeze from the open door. His math textbook was open to a page stained with what looked like coffee, and his phone lay cracked beside the overturned coffee table. "Daniel!" My voice echoed through empty rooms as I moved through the house with tactical precision, clearing corners and checking sight lines the way I'd been trained to search buildings in Fallujah. Every room told the story of a brief struggle. Overturned chairs, scattered books, the faint scent of an unfamiliar cologne that made my skin crawl with recognition. In Daniel's bedroom, I found a note pinned to his pillow with a knife I recognized as one from our kitchen set. "The boy's safe, for now. Pier 19 Marina, midnight. Come alone or collect his body tomorrow. P.S. Elena sends her love." Victor had crossed the final line, moving from psychological warfare to direct action against my family. But in doing so, he had also made a critical tactical error. He'd forced a United States Marine sniper into a corner where negotiation was no longer possible. Cole arrived within minutes of my call, bringing tactical gear and the cold fury of a Marine whose brother's family had been threatened. He took one look at the devastation in our living room and nodded grimly. "How do you want to play this?" he asked, checking his sidearm with the automatic precision of someone who'd done it countless times under fire. "We do this quiet and clean," I replied, retrieving my own weapon from the secure case in my study. "No witnesses, no complications, no loose ends." "Rules of engagement?" I looked at the knife still pinned through the note on Daniel's pillow, thinking about my 16-year-old son in the hands of a man who'd already demonstrated his capacity for extreme violence. "Anyone pointing a weapon at my boy dies. Anyone who tries to stop us from getting him back dies. Anyone who gets between us and the exit dies." Cole's smile carried no warmth. "Roger that. Just like old times." As we prepared our equipment and planned our approach to the marina, I felt the familiar transformation taking place in my mind.
The shift from civilian father to combat Marine, from protector to predator. Victor Delgado wanted to play war games with someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of precise, lethal violence. He was about to discover exactly what that meant. I retrieved my .308 Winchester from its case for the first time in over a decade, hands moving through muscle memory that transcended conscious thought. The rifle had been my constant companion through 2 deployments, responsible for eliminating 37 confirmed threats at ranges from 300 to 1,400 meters.
The ghillie suit felt familiar as breathing, its carefully woven strands designed to break up human silhouette in natural environments. While Cole coordinated with his contacts in the sheriff's department, establishing alibis and ensuring minimal law enforcement presence near the marina, I planned every angle of approach to Pier 19. The marina sat on a peninsula jutting into Lake Norman, accessible by a single road with limited cover. Victor had chosen the location well. Open approaches, controlled access, multiple escape routes by water. But he'd made the mistake of choosing a battlefield against someone who understood terrain the way other men understood their own reflection. Elena called as I prepared, her voice breaking with sobs that carried genuine terror. "Michael, I'm so sorry. He said he just wanted to talk to Daniel, to explain things. I never thought he would." "Where are you now?" I cut through her apologies with clinical precision. "At my sister's house in Charlotte. He told me to stay away until morning, said if I tried to interfere he'd—" Her voice broke completely. "Stay there. If Cole and I don't call by dawn, contact the FBI and tell them everything. Everything, Elena. The affair, the threats, the timeline of events." "Michael, please don't do anything that—" "Some battles require crossing lines you can never uncross," I told her, checking the action on my rifle one final time. "Tonight will determine which kind of man I truly am." After hanging up, I sat in my study for several minutes, studying photographs of Daniel that covered my desk. Little League games, camping trips, his proud smile after catching his first fish at Miller's Creek. Somewhere in the darkness, my son was waiting for his father to save him from a nightmare that began with his mother's betrayal and would end with his father's capacity for controlled violence. Cole arrived at 11:15 p.m., dressed in black tactical gear and carrying enough firepower to assault a small building. Surveillance confirms 3 vehicles at the marina: Victor's BMW, a black SUV, and a white van. Thermal imaging shows at least 4 individuals, one of them smaller than the others. Daniel. Most likely. Heat signature suggests that positioned at the end of the main pier, using the boat slips for cover and concealment. I shouldered my rifle and checked my watch. 11:30 p.m. In 30 minutes, Victor Delgado would learn the difference between threatening a civilian and challenging a United States Marine who'd spent years eliminating enemies of his country with surgical precision. The hunt was about to begin. At Pier 19, the darkness smelled of salt water, diesel fuel, and the metallic scent of fear that preceded violent action. Victor waited at the dock's end with 2 armed men, their positions professionally spaced to provide overlapping fields of fire. Daniel sat bound to a wooden chair between them, his eyes reflecting marina lights with adolescent courage masquerading as calm. Through my scope, positioned 200 meters away in the tree line, I could see every detail of the tactical situation. Victor wore an expensive jacket that probably concealed body armor. His men carried pistols and what looked like submachine guns, professional weapons for professional killers. "Michael, right on time!" Victor's voice carried across the water as I approached along the wooden walkway, hands visible, letting them think I was complying with his demand to come alone. "Beautiful night for a family reunion." Behind me, invisible in the darkness,
Cole moved through the shadows like the ghost he'd been in Fallujah, positioning himself for clean shots at the two gunmen. "Let him go, Victor. Your fight's with me." "My fight is with your stubborn refusal to accept reality." He gestured to his men, who shifted their weapons toward Daniel with practiced precision. "Elena chose me. Your son will too, once he understands what kind of killer his father really is." "Daniel," I called out, never taking my eyes off Victor. "Remember what I taught you about situational awareness."
"Yes, sir," Daniel replied, his voice steady despite the fear I could see in his posture. "Good boy. When I say now, you make yourself as small as possible." Victor laughed, the sound echoing across the dark water. "Still giving orders, Sergeant Torres? This isn't Afghanistan. These aren't insurgents you can eliminate from 1,000 meters away. This is America, and if you kill me, you go to prison for the rest of your life." "Maybe," I said, taking another step closer. "But you'll still be dead." The first shot came from Cole's position, a suppressed rifle round that dropped Victor's left-hand gunman before he could react. I moved simultaneously, muscle memory taking over as I closed distance with the deadly efficiency that had once made me one of the Marine Corps' most feared close-quarters combatants. Victor grabbed Daniel as a shield, pressing a pistol to my son's temple. One more step and the boy dies. "Now, Daniel!" My son's perfectly timed elbow strike, 16 years of his father's subtle lessons in awareness and action, caught Victor in the solar plexus, doubling him over and creating the opening I needed. The combat knife I had carried through 2 deployments found its mark with surgical precision, ending Victor Delgado's threat to my family with the same clinical efficiency I'd once used to eliminate enemies of my country. The second gunman died attempting to bring his weapon to bear on Cole's position, and suddenly the marina was quiet, except for the gentle lapping of waves against the dock. Victor Delgado had died as he'd lived, surprised that someone had finally refused to be intimidated by his threats and manipulations. Elena returned 3 days later, her affair ending with Victor's disappearance into the deep waters of Lake Norman. The official investigation, guided by Cole's careful management of evidence and witness statements, concluded that Victor had fled town to avoid outstanding warrants related to organized crime activities. His body would never be found, and the men who'd worked for him had vanished as completely as if they had never existed. In the criminal underworld Victor had inhabited, people disappeared regularly, and law enforcement rarely invested significant resources in locating predators who preyed on their own kind. Daniel and I never spoke directly about what happened at the marina, but something fundamental had changed between us. He'd seen his father's capacity for controlled violence and chosen to stand with him rather than against him. The boy who'd gone fishing with me just weeks ago had become a young man who understood that sometimes good people must do terrible things to protect what they love. Elena tried to rebuild what she'd broken, attending counseling sessions and making promises about transparency and communication. But the house felt different now, charged with unspoken knowledge about what her choices had cost our family. She moved through our rooms like a guest uncertain of her welcome, and perhaps that's exactly what she'd become. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she said one evening as we sat on the porch watching Daniel practice basketball shots in our driveway. "I understand," I replied, and I did. Military service changes you in ways that civilians can't always comprehend, and Elena had been as much a casualty of my transition to civilian life as I had been. But understanding doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change what I had to do.
Can you forgive me? The question hung between us like smoke from a distant fire. I already have. The question is whether you can forgive yourself. Some evenings, I sit on our porch and watch the red-tailed hawk circling overhead, its wings catching thermals with the effortless precision of a creature perfectly adapted to its environment. The peace I'd fought to build still exists, but it's different now, sharper, more aware,
protected by knowledge that some battles never truly end. Daniel has grown stronger in the weeks since the marina, his shoulders broader, his gaze more direct. He asks more questions about my military service now, and I answer them honestly, helping him understand the weight of choices that define character when everything familiar disappears. The hawk disappears into the darkening sky, and I lock the door behind me, knowing that vigilance is the price of everything worth protecting. Tomorrow, Daniel and I will go fishing again at Miller's Creek, and life will continue with the quiet rhythms of a family that has survived its darkest test. But I'll never again make the mistake of believing that peace is permanent, or that the capacity for violence isn't sometimes the only thing standing between the people you love and the predators who would destroy them. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.